Tonight we have the great pleasure of the opportunity to listen to Kate Elias. I'm going to tell you something about Kate, and you're going to learn a great deal more when you hear her talk. Kate is a lifetime seeker and longtime member of BALI. She was born in Walla Walla and moved to Seattle with her family when she was just 5 months old. And she tells me she has a vivid memory of that move. She's almost a Seattle native because of that early move. Her family was Irish Catholic, so she was educated in Catholic schools and even did time in a convent. She felt drawn to Judaism from an early age, but it took 60 years of life's twists and turns to bring her through the door of Beit Aleph one Friday night in 2003. At that moment, she knew she was home and she has never left. Professionally, Kate was a writer and science editor at the University of Washington for over 30 years. In retirement, she has edited and coordinated several books for the Three Amigos, who many of you know. That's Rabbi Ted Falcon, Imam Jamal Rahman, and Pastor Don McKenzie. She has also ghostwritten a few books and is the co-author of a book, Out of Darkness into Light, an award-winning book about spiritual guidance in the Quran with reflections from Christian and Jewish sources. There's more, but Kate isn't here to talk about herself. She's here to talk about her late husband, who was already trapped in the Holocaust the year she was born. So, Kate, please tell us more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stu, very much for the invitation to take part in your series. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in this evening to hear me talk about Zdeněk Elias and about a play that he wrote when he was a young man in the Holocaust. Zdeněk was a thoroughly secular Czech Jew from the heart of Europe, and life with him turned me from a parochial American into an honorary Czech and a more conscious citizen of the world. If I had to describe him in 100 words or less, I would say he was an inexhaustible source of knowledge about history, literature, and music, a keen observer of world politics and human behavior, a quiet man with a ready wit and a wry sense of humor. Above all, he was a mensch who survived the horrors of the Holocaust with his humanity intact and his worldview untroubled by a personal need for vengeance or retribution. Zdeněk was just graduating from high school when the German army marched into Czechoslovakia and had just begun his philosophy studies at Charles University in Prague when the Nazis closed the university in reprisal for student demonstrations. I'm going to show you a picture of his Charles University, it was a booklet really that was going to serve as the transcript for his years of college. But this was the, the first couple of pages, and here's an enlargement of his photo so that you can see what a handsome guy he was.
Kate, can you tell us about his last name was changed on
yes,
that?
John, Yes, I got carried away going to the next one because I want to tell you actually about on his transcript. Let me just enlarge this so you can see it a little better. So you see that there are two names here, one crossed out and with a new name added. The story of that is that back in the days of the Habsburg Empire, Jews were forced to have German surnames. And as far back as his brother can remember, the family name was Eckstein. I asked his brother once if he knew at all what the family name might have been before the Habsburgs, but that's, a couple hundred years ago, and no, he didn't know. As far as he knows, it was always Eckstein. By the end of the war, the Czechs hated the Germans so much that they advised any Jews who were able to return to maybe take non-German names to protect themselves. So Zdeněk and his brother decided to embrace their Jewishness by adopting the name of the prophet Elijah. That's Elias in Czech and Elias in American. So, stop share. Okay. After the university closed, he worked at his parents' brick factory for a while until it was seized by the Nazis. And then he was transported to a concentration camp in Terezin, a Czech town about 40 miles north of Prague. After 2 years in Terezin, he was deported by cattle car to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And yes, he said the cattle car was as horrific as it has been described. How does one survive something like that? By lowering expectations, he told me. Accept the reality of your situation and don't make yourself crazy by expecting things to be other than they are when you have no possibility or power to change them. I'd like to say that, I learned the wisdom of this philosophy very early on when we were on honeymoon and we found ourselves stranded by a wildcat rail strike in Italy. We had been day tripping in Venice and anticipating a nice, comfortable train ride back to our hotel in Treviso. But because of the strike, instead of that nice roomy train with cushy seats, we were crammed into a bus with at least 100 other people, nose to armpit, if you get my drift, with no air, nothing to hold on to, no room, even to shuffle our feet. I thought about those cattle cars and reminded myself that this was hardly the same thing. So maybe I should abandon my dream of a comfy train ride and just be grateful to be reunited eventually with our car and the chilled San Pellegrino in the hotel room. Still, I felt like I might pass out, but finally someone figured out how to open a window. Salvation. And again, I thought of those prisoners taking turns to get a whiff of air from the single window high up in the cattle car. How low their expectations had to sink in order for them to survive. Small and undernourished though he was, Zdeněk passed selection in Auschwitz and was assigned to a row of barracks just inside the gate of the Birkenau addition. Here is that gate, which the prisoners knew. They called it the Gate of Death. And here are the barracks that are just inside that gate, actually. They're still standing in this eerie landscape of all those foundations and chimneys marking the locations of other barracks as far as the eye can see. This photo does not begin to show how many barracks There were, 4 acres in this place. But these barracks that you see up here in front, Zdeněk was in those barracks. Let me say. Those particular barracks were euphemistically called the Czech family camp. And they served as a temporary guise to fool the world about the true purpose of Auschwitz, and also to con Terezin survivors or Terezin prisoners who lived in dread of being transported to the east. See how nicely we're treating the Jews, why we even let families stay together. There's nothing to worry about here. Gotta say, it felt unreal to walk through those barracks on a Beit Olive pilgrimage in 2015, knowing that my own dear one had been imprisoned there in another lifetime ago. Zdeněk was in that camp for about 6 weeks, and his job was to take care of the children of his fellow prisoners while the adults were occupied in slave labor. After the war, he wrote movingly of the day he sat outdoors with the children and read them an idyllic story about the Happy Prince while watching plumes of black smoke from the crematoria at the other end of the camp. He knew it was their only way out of the camp. And sure enough, after the world stopped paying attention, which wasn't all that long, some 6,500 children, women, and elderly prisoners from the family camp were herded into gas chambers, and soon their souls were escaping through those chimneys. Meanwhile, the Nazis realized that the able-bodied men in the family camp should be pressed into more useful service because all the able-bodied Germans were busy making the world safe for Aryan purity. So 1,000 Czech men from the family camp, Zdeněk included, were sent to Schwarzheide, a slave labor camp about 30 miles north of Dresden, to repair a chemical and munitions factory that was a frequent target for Allied bombs. It was a brutal and dangerous assignment, and only 79 of the original 1,000 men survived. When the Nazis decided to hide the evidence in the waning days of the war, they relocated most of the prisoners by forced march to Terezin, a distance of 100 miles, on exhausted legs with very little food. And whoever couldn't keep up was shot on the spot. Zdeněk's brother was on that march and survived, but Zdeněk was so debilitated that he said to a friend, "Let them shoot me, I'm dead already." Instead of being shot, he was loaded into a lorry and taken to an infirmary in Sachsenhausen near Berlin, which was liberated by the Russians a few days later. When he was stable enough to be moved, he was repatriated to Prague and spent 3 months in the hospital. That's where his brother found him, swaddled in blankets like a mummy, to help his body retain calories as he slowly came back to life. Those 2 brothers, plus a cousin, were the only members of their extended family to survive. As I said earlier, Zdeněk was one of the lucky ones who survived with his humanity and humor intact. He attributed his survival to a certain fatalistic streak, which his brother claimed was part of his personality from an early age. I knew him not as a fatalist, but as a stark realist, which I attribute to the early influence of his parents. Like many Czech Jews of that generation, they belonged to the freethinkers movement and taught their sons to rely on honor and personal responsibility, not some puppet master in the sky. The resident grandma would retire to her room on Friday nights to light candles and whisper prayers, but Zdeněk and his brother grew up with the belief that stuff happens and no amount of faith or hope in God can alter that fact, so you might as well learn to deal with it yourself. So he dealt with the Shoah in his own way, and whether he was stoic by nature or by nurture, it truly helped him survive. As he wrote a few years later, It was not because of my tenacity, strong physique, ingenuousness, or even my will to survive that I came out more or less unharmed. Whenever the opportunity or necessity to act presented itself, invariably I did not act at all. Sometimes I was physically unable to act. Sometimes I was not aware of the opportunity. Watching others attempt every possible means of escape or strive to better their lot by every imaginable way, and seeing them only hastening their end, I finally developed a certain fatalistic mood that eventually proved my salvation. Well, life goes on, and so it did for Zdeněk. He started to resume his studies at Charles University, but found it pointless after what he had been through. So he dropped out of school and began to work for the United Press in Prague. When the communists took control of the country in 1948, he had had enough of totalitarian rule and managed to escape over the Shumava Mountains into Germany. I have to shake my head at the very idea of a Holocaust survivor seeking freedom in Germany, of all places. He listed America as his preferred country for resettlement, and his number came up late in 1949. By serendipity or fate, he ran into an old Czech friend on the streets of New York and learned about a brand new organization called Radio Free Europe, which was looking for a guy with his multilingual and journalistic skills. For the next 30 years, he alternated between Radio Free Europe headquarters in New York and in Munich, broadcasting and working tirelessly as chief of the Czech desk to convince his fellow Czechs behind the Iron Curtain that there was a better way to live than barely surviving under Soviet rule. So, share screen. Here is the man I loved in one of my favorite poses of him at his desk at RFE, you know, with his pipe and the smoke and the nice old telephone. I didn't see him, you know, in a shirt and tie in our daily life at home, but yes, constantly reading the newspapers, smoking the pipe. I mean, that was Zdeněk. And here is another shot of him as sort of the poster boy for RFE. So when he retired, when it came time for him to retire, he decided to relocate to Seattle because his 3 kids had all settled along the West Coast, and he liked the mountains here. And this is where my life with Zdeněk Elias began. We met because my younger brother and Zdeněk's elder daughter were a couple for several years. They eventually parted company, but he and I were simply meant to be together. Never mind the 23 years and the cultural differences between us. We merged our lives in 1988. Here we are, come on honeymoon in Munich. God, I was young. Stop share. And what? And that's when I discovered that Zdeněk never threw away a piece of paper with writing on it. His desk drawers were like a geniza, overflowing with correspondence and the sacred texts of a professional news hound. One day, while I was helping him bring some order to the chaos, Sistu, I guess I could probably help you. I noticed a document that seemed older than the rest, a carbon copy on wartime newsprint. Let me enlarge this a little bit, spread it out. This is what it looked like. The European size text and already ratty around the edges. It also was, I can show you, it was a very interesting typeface. Not one that I've been able to identify at all. We think that probably he used a typewriter that was in the camps. This is certainly not the typeface that was on his typewriter in the years that I knew him. But look at these nice formations, like the shape of this J here, and the shape of this W. Really quite lovely, older style. I like it a lot. Anyway. The whole thing looked very much like it was a play. And I said, "What is this?" "Oh, just a youthful endeavor," he said. "What kind of endeavor?" I asked, but he was absorbed in another folder, and he said he'd tell me later. Well, later didn't happen. Life. And then one day he had a massive heart attack, and he was gone. Over time, I stored his files in the attic, but certain papers, his citizenship papers, his press passes, and that strange folder of newsprint I kept in a fireproof safe. Again, life goes on. One Sunday morning, a few years later, I was awakened by a total stranger who was calling from Prague via the new technology, new then, called Skype. Her name was Lisa Peschel, and she was in the Czech Republic on a Fulbright scholarship to research theater in concentration camp Terezin for her PhD. I'll say more about why Terezin in a few minutes. But meanwhile, here is a nice picture of Lisa, just so you can have this very nice face in your mind. I have to move this over. Okay. Well, she's at one of the memorials at Terezin. There are several memorials there. One Christian one, and I don't know, at least 2 or 3 different memorials to the Jewish victims, plus a very nice museum there, as a matter of fact. Anyway, so that's Lisa. You're going to hear more about her. So, okay. So she had, where am I? She had met up with Zdeněk's brother Luděk, Elias, and their mutual friend Jiří Franiak, both of whom had been active in the Terezin theater. And they told her about a play that Zdeněk had written with another friend in the attic of the men's barracks while they were interned there. For the record, that friend's name was Jiří Stein, or Jirka Stein. And I can't tell you anything else about him except that he was an engineering student and a poet, and that he died in Dachau towards the end of 1944. That the script survived the war was a bit of a miracle. No one knows what happened to the original, but it seems that Zdeněk entrusted a carbon copy to a friend in Terezin before he boarded the cattle car to Auschwitz. Her deportation number never came up, so the script remained safe with her, and she was able to return it to him after the war. That's why Lisa was calling me on the off chance that the play might still be in his files. My mind flashed on that mystery manuscript in the safe, and I said, I think I may have what you're looking for. Thus began the adventure of bringing Zdeněk's youthful endeavor to the stage for the first time. The first step was to obtain a good translation, and for that I turned to Zdeněk's daughter, Dorothy Elias. This was the first she knew of her father as a playwright, and it must have been thrilling to sit with his words and turn them into idiomatic English. To ensure that the dialogue would stand well on the stage, Lisa flew to Seattle and enlisted a few actors to do several read-throughs while we tweaked the wording here and there. You know, we don't usually think about how plastic language is, how it's constantly evolving from one generation to the next. Just out of high school, Zdeněk would have been writing primarily in the Czech of his teachers and parents, which in some cases was a little outdated by the time Dorothy was translating his words some 60 years later. So it took a bit of sleuthing to decipher the best translation here and there. And I'm pleased to say that although my Czech isn't all that great, I was well enough acquainted with some of his Czech idioms and the way he spoke American that I was able to help turn a few obscure phrases into his American English. I'm even more pleased to report that when Lisa showed 3 or 4 versions of the play's final line to an elderly survivor, mine is the one that was chosen. It felt like the play wanted to be brought alive on stage. So I showed it to a couple of theater people here in Seattle who had connections to that house theater and the theater department at the UW. But its European context was too obscure for them and they didn't see an audience for it. Lisa did an experimental production of the Czech version in Prague, where people know their history. And the reaction of her audience showed that it might have legs. Then a colleague of Lisa's saw a copy of the English translation and asked for permission to stage a one-night performance the following year as part of the inaugural season of an Institute of Arts and Humanities in Terezin. I was present for that performance and sat there among dignitaries as if in a dream, representing Zdeněk at the Terezin premiere of a play he had written there all those years ago. And yes, that audience of Czech Jews knew their history, and the play clearly resonated with them. Next came a production at American University in Washington, D.C., as part of a series honoring the silenced voices of Terezin, and an interesting question arose. Since American audiences probably wouldn't appreciate the play without some kind of historical context, QED my experience here in Seattle, would it be permitted to embed it in a larger drama, a kind of play within a play? What would Zdeněk say? Well, he loved Shakespeare in both English and Czech, and Shakespeare used that device, so why not give it a try? I think Dorothy and I agreed that it was a creditable effort, though we both prefer the play without an exoskeleton to prop it up. As the Czech ambassador said at the final performance, one could hope that the students' avid involvement would guarantee that younger, better educated generations will not repeat the atrocities of the Holocaust. But I'm not so sure, as we learn more every day about the sins committed against ethnic minorities in every part of the world, including the US, Canada, the UK. But even so, some consciousness raising is better than none. Another hybrid production was mounted at the University of New Hampshire. And then Lisa has staged 3 performances without exoskeleton in the UK. One at York University, where she's now a drama professor. One co-produced by York and Leeds universities in the ruins of Clifford's Tower in York. And a really excellent performance at Bloomsbury Theatre in London. You can see those 3 productions by simply Googling Lisa Peschel, and that name is spelled P-E-S-C-H-E-L, and The Smoke of Home. So just Lisa Peschel, The Smoke of Home. Don't settle for just one of those productions. It's amazing to see how the same director can produce such a variety of performances of the same play. Just this spring, one of Lisa's British colleagues did a day-long workshop about the play on Zoom, for which Dorothy and I rose at an ungodly hour to chat with the group across the pond about how we thought Zdeněk meant various moments to be performed. The day ended with a COVID-distanced readers' theater, the actors speaking in their individual spaces and then spliced together by technical magic. It was odd, but oddly effective. And now, after all that buildup, you might like to know what the play is about. It's called The Smoke of Home, and it's set during the 30 Years' War in the 1600s. Most Americans know nothing about that war, but it's still alive for Czechs and other Europeans because it was a battle for religious and national independence. And there are still resentments about how it turned out. The Czechs lost. It's a short play, just one act, but it packs a wallop. 4 prisoners of war have been forgotten in the tower of a German fortress and wonder if they will ever see their homes again. One sleepless night, prisoner Christian is watching the stars out the barred windows and wondering if his girlfriend back home can see the same star he's looking at. Waldau wakes up and they talk about how they long for the smoke of home, the smell of roast venison, and the taste of decent wine. Their voices awaken Father Anselm, a priest, and he lectures them to trust that God will set them free. Ha, says the 4th prisoner, Caecilius. God disposes as he pleases. Clearly, this is the voice of my free-thinking Zdeněk. The priest continues to spout pious platitudes, which Caecilius parries brilliantly, and tension builds until Christian demands, God, if you exist, show yourself, show us a sign. Suddenly, a pebble is thrown through the barred window and a woman's voice calls out, Sir Christian. It's Veronica, a woman who had befriended him some months before, and she's there to rescue him. Only him, at most only one other. A furious argument breaks out between Waldau and the priest about who deserves to leave the prison with Christian and enjoy the delicious smoke of home. They come to blows, and Caecilius jumps between them, shouting, Fools, get hold of yourselves. Should I tell you what I heard from the guard last night? How General so-and-so has torn across the countryside, sowing all the horrors of war? How all your towns and villages have been torched? That is your smoke of home today. You want to go home? The home you left is in the past. It's a different world out there, I tell you. The past is over. His cellmates are shocked into silence. Suddenly, church bells begin to ring and voices outside begin to shout, Peace, peace, the war is over, you can go home. The 4 prisoners are transfixed. Waldau chokes out the word home, and Caecilius dissolves into ironic laughter. Little wonder why the play written in Terezin couldn't be performed there. Time now to talk about Terezin and its special place in the history of the Shoah. Terezin, or Theresienstadt in German, was a small garrison town built to protect the northern border of the Habsburg Empire. Here is a nice old map. Ooh, these guys. Sorry, I can't get to it. Here we go. A nice old map from Lord knows what century, actually. I think I saw somewhere that it was like from the 1700s. But anyway, it's Terezin is, it was built in a kind of a star shape. you can see that it is really surrounded by water. You know, there's a river kind of running through it and around it, and then there are moats. There are moats all around the grounds. The main part of the town was up here, and there were some residences, but mostly barracks for the military, since it was a garrison town. In this area here, there were like grassy bunkers that they could use, I suppose, for, I don't know, maybe for sports or whatever. There was a horrifying tunnel that runs under it. I walked that tunnel, and only once in my life that was enough. Down here is what is called the little fortress, a prison for any, you know, prisoners who make trouble. So all told, it was kind of a perfect place to concentrate Jews from all over the Nazi occupied lands before sending them to Auschwitz and other termination camps. That the town's 3,000 residents were ordered to move, and tens of thousands of Jews were shipped in from Prague and surrounding areas. At any one time, more than 60,000 people were crammed into those barracks and the confiscated homes. Numbers are still being debated, but according to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Studies, about 152,000 men, women, and children were shipped to Terezin. 34,000 died right there of starvation, disease, and brutality. And 88,000 were deported to the gas chambers of the Eastern Europe. Doing the math, we find that only about 30,000 of those 152,000 souls were still alive at the end. Because Terezin was just a hellhole, and not strictly speaking a death camp, if you ignore that mortality rate, it was almost inevitable that a certain amount of cultural life should emerge, because humans simply need some kind of artistic expression, and will find ways to have it. Graphic artists cadged scraps of paper and stubs of pencil and hid their drawings under the floorboards or in cracks in the wall. Plays and concerts were clandestine at first. Prisoners used blankets to soundproof the attic theater. But as the Nazis became aware of the prisoners' nightlife, they realized that showing a little tolerance would prove to the world how humane and civilized they were. And that's how Terezin came to be Exhibit A whenever scholars talk about the arts as a means of spiritual survival, escape, resistance. Victor Ullmann, a musician and composer who was interned in Terezin and murdered in Auschwitz, invoked Psalm 137 with his comment, "We did not simply sit down by the rivers of Babylon and weep. We evinced a desire to produce art that was entirely commensurate with our will to live." Children's drawings from Terezin express their longing for the world they left behind. Here's a very typical drawing, a little bit heartbreaking. Nice family Seder. And stop share. And their poetry evinces a terrible wisdom beyond their years. Listen to these lines by a boy named Hanush, who was maybe 11 or 12. "I was once a little child 3 years ago, that child who longed for other worlds. But now I am no more a child, for I have learned to hate. I am a grown-up person now. I have known fear of more than the boogeyman." Several of Czechoslovakia's most famous artists created numerous illustrations of life and death in the ghetto, some of them so damning that their creators ended up in the fortress prison or on the next transport to Auschwitz. My personal favorite is Otto Ungar, whose right hand was mutilated in the prison at Terezin, and yet in Auschwitz he was so determined to record the horrors he saw around him that he would grasp any bit of charcoal he could find in his malformed hand and continue to draw on any scrap of paper. Here's actually one of his more cheerful works. It's of the theater in Terezin. And I can tell you, I've been in that room, and this is a very good representation of the room. And the stage really was very small, and there was room for probably a max of 50 or 60 people to cram into the room. All of his art sort of has this look to it, you know, the heavy black lines and quite a nice use of color. I like his stuff a lot. Okay. Terezin was full of composers and musicians, and the conductor Raphael Schechter is my forever hero because he taught a choir of 150 prisoners to sing Verdi's Requiem using a single score and wrote a repetition to learn it. Every evening after a day of labor on maybe 6 hours of sleep and 700 calories of slop, inmates would go to a frigid basement to lift their spirits with Verdi's ethereal music. The ghetto's Jewish leaders objected to the idea of Jews singing a Catholic mass, but Schechter assured them that this way they could sing to the Nazis what they could not say to them. Dies irae, dies illa, day of wrath, oh, that day, you guys are going to hell. Sadly, it was Schechter and most of his singers who went straight to the hell of Auschwitz after their final performance, given Nazi command to show the Red Cross what a beautiful cultural city the Führer had gifted to the Jews. We know about Raphael Schechter and his choir because of another Jew you should know about, the American conductor Murray Seidlin. Maestro Seidlin, who has for many years has had various positions in Washington, D.C. He immortalized the musicians of Terezin by creating a program called Defiant Requiem and presenting it in cities all over Europe and the US, including Seattle. So some of you may have seen it here. It was here 2 or 3 years ago, I think. By sheer chance, I happened to be in Prague when he brought his Defiant Requiem to Europe. And I attended a performance right where the story began in Terezin. Talk about a wow experience. Here is, just so you can know what he looks like. Here's Marie. Talking with me. I need to get rid of this other. Sorry, be patient. Okay, there he is talking with me in Terezin. Just a typical Jewish conductor, you know, with the white hair and that nice face. Okay. And here is the powerful poster that was created for his institute. I love this thing. I have it framed and you know, hanging in my guest room. So I hope that when guests come and sleep over, you know, they're not too disturbed at the image of prisoners and barbed wire. Okay. Now, yeah, okay. To learn more about Defiant Requiem and Sidlin's more recent program about Terezin composers, just type Defiant Requiem into your search engine. For Zdeněk and his brother Luděk, their life-giving art form was theater. Both of them performed in several shows. I've seen their names on playbills in the Terezin Museum. And after the war, Luděk became a well-known actor on Czech stage, TV, and movie screen. Who knows what kind of future Zdeněk might have had his friend Jirka Stein lived to collaborate on other plays. I could see them writing works of biting humor and political satire, like those of the famous Czech playwright Václav Havel. Maybe all their plays would have been darker than audiences would want to see. Certainly, The Smoke of Home would not have entertained people who needed cabaret shows and comedies to lift their spirits. Indeed, most of the theater in Terezin was cabaret, popular songs interspersed with coded humor at Nazi expense. Did those poor doomed prisoners really need these two young whippersnappers telling them truths that they didn't want to face? I would so love to be able to talk with Zdeněk about this. I wish, but anyway. Zdeněk's friend Jiří Franiek did talk about it with Lisa. Very few people could face the idea that a much different life awaited them after the war, he said, quote, a great number of people lived only for their memories of home, a home they very much idealized. They spent hours talking about it, who they had been, what it was like, what they had achieved. All those naive recollections were related to a notion of home that was unchanging. Only a few were able to look the truth in the eye. Zdeněk and his playwriting friend were among those few. Well, to the end, I knew Zdeněk as a man who looked truth in the eye. And I wonder what he would make of our current era of alternate facts and conspiracy theories. He often said that the more he read about how the world would be in the 21st century, the less sure he was that he wanted anything to do with it. And sure enough, he stuck around for only a month after the new millennium began. I shudder to think what he would say to us today. I think I'd like to end with my favorite portrait of Zdeněk by his daughter, Dorothy, who is actually quite a talented photographer in her own right. And a few words from a eulogy by one of his colleagues at Radio Free Europe. Zdeněk Elias never achieved great wealth or fame or power, never achieved greatness in the way the world measures it. But he was nonetheless one of the greatest men I have ever known, because without being religious, he achieved spiritual greatness. In the midst of the worst imaginable kind of human injustice and misery, he became stoical and never let the experience of the Holocaust warp or destroy his soul. He had a wisdom of both brain and heart like few others, and was the very model of the great-souled man described by Aristotle. And now I'd like to pour you all a glass of Becherovka, that's the Czech national liqueur, and entertain any questions or comments you might have.
I'm absolutely blown away and had no idea, so appreciative of all that you've told us, so rich and informing. I had no idea.
Yeah, you know, he was gone before any of my BALI people would have known him. Yeah.
Yeah.
whatever effort, I'm sure it was a huge effort that you put into this, Kate, was certainly worthwhile for those of us listening. What a powerful testimony to a wonderful man.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Here's the Becherovka, by the way. Just I guess I'll have to do, I have to do what Olivier does, when he drinks this, the wine, the Oneg wine on Zoom or whatever. I'll just have to drink this for you.
What is it? What is it? Is it?
It's Becherovka, and it's an herbal liqueur, as a matter of fact. The Czechs are really very into doing all kinds of things with herbs, and it's really a very nice drink. I'll share it with you sometime.
Okay, all right.
Is it an aperitif or
It is.
sweet or?
Well, it's herbal and just sweet enough, almost like a little bit of honey in it or something. Yeah, so I've always known it as an aperitif. And I will say the first time I tried it one time in Czechia, it kind of burned my throat, and I wasn't too sure about this. My throat has matured. So
Kate, I was at Terezin. I think I told you that on the phone. And without that story, it was just it kind of blew my mind just walking in there. I think the first thing you see is just all those children's pictures. And,
yeah, I know it. Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, and that they were using it as propaganda, right? They sent those images out to other people, right? Is that right? And it's really amazing to have, I mean, it's real. Obviously, when you're seeing it, it's real. But it so brings it home when you tell a story about somebody that was really there, somebody that you loved. And I thank you so much. I mean, it just was so, I mean, I can close my eyes and be back at that place. I was there with my mom. And it was just, it was certainly the highlight or low light. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, my trip to Prague, it was haunting. And they play the music in the background that people sang, and it was haunting. And now it seems so real.
Kate, perchance, do you know Peter Curtis?
I don't.
He wrote a book, actually a trilogy. The first one was called Cafe Budapest, about how his
Buttonhole.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. Dragon's Tail Buttonhole.
Huh. Okay.
And that was his first book, and he.
What's his name again?
Peter Curtis.
Peter. Okay.
And he writes the story about how he escaped Czechoslovakia at about age 3.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And it's really you would enjoy meeting and talking with him, and he would enjoy you as well.
I would very much like to. Yeah. I guess I'd like to read it first, and so so that we really could have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Yeah, he and his wife were part of a walking group that I was. He had gone from there to England. He and then here he's was a physician, retired, and she a nurse. And I think Carolyn is Jewish. Peter definitely is. Anyway, well, after you read the book, we can maybe make that happen.
I'll send you some information about how to find it.
I would like to have that.
Kate, thank you so much.
Oh,
I was now with you for the 3rd time in Terezin.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember both our trips, our visits there, also meeting his brother.
Yes.
Yes.
And well, and the wonderful place where you did meet him, you know, in that secret synagogue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The brother didn't even know that that existed.
No, he hadn't known. So here he is. You know, when you met him, he was what, about 90.
Yeah.
And this is the first time he knew that there was this synagogue. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
You know, Kate, to me, for him to be able to boil down this sort of like live in reality state so that you can survive, I think that's really quite extraordinary. And I think that's a lesson that, I mean, needs to be taught right now to the whole world. You
To the
know?
whole world. You know, in a lot of ways, it is what we also do hear from Olivier, and I think I used to hear also from Rabbi Ted, you know, say amen to whatever is.
Yeah.
Which is not the same as, you know, just resigning yourself. But like I said, you know, don't make yourself crazy over something you can't change.
Right.
Yeah.
But also it's extraordinary that both he and his brother survived and were on the same march. I mean, these are not, I don't know, they're not coincidences in my mind. You know, it's really quite extraordinary. And then you have to realize that, you know, they're from the same family, and they probably, maybe the brother didn't see himself in the same way, but I there was something in
Pretty
both
much,
of
I
them.
think. Pretty
Yeah.
much, I do think so, Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I do have to say, it wasn't entirely by chance, I think, that that they were on the, you know, had the same deportation and stuff. What did happen, Zdeněk went to Terezin actually several weeks after his parents and his brother had been sent there. He had been in the hospital in Prague with some undiagnosed thing, and eventually they gave up on making him well, and so they just sent him to Terezin anyway. But then when it came time, you know, for them to ship him off to Auschwitz, Ludiak was not on that, he wasn't on that list, but Ludiak's girlfriend was. And so Ludiak said, I want to go also.
Wow.
And so that's how he ended up being on the same deportation with Zdeněk. Meanwhile, the girlfriend's family had somehow pulled some strings and got her pulled off. But the fact that that Ludiak was with him on, you know, in Auschwitz and in Schwarzheide, there really was probably a lifesaver for Zdeněk, because Ludiak, you know, being a young actor, how do young actors make a living when they're not on the stage? They wait tables or they work in the kitchen, right? And so Ludiak was often working in the kitchen and was able to slip an extra potato peel or whatever to Zdeněk. You know, he weighed 68 pounds at the end.
Wow.
At the end of, well, so yeah, Ludiak was a little healthier and a couple of years younger, and so yeah, the way also, you know, the way Ludiak found Zdeněk at the end of the war. Ludiak volunteered with some group that sent volunteers to the various hospitals where the survivors were, to just do the night shift, to go around from bed to bed and check, you know, that people were still breathing, bring them a glass of water if they needed, just that kind of thing. And one night, Ludiak was in that particular hospital and he was making the rounds, and he came to a bed, and the occupant of the bed was wrapped like a mummy, and all that was showing was his head, which was of course still kind of shaved, but Ludiak recognized the shape of the head.
Wow.
Oh,
What a story.
Yeah.
Jeez.
That really is extraordinary.
Oh my God.
This is such a historical presentation that you're presenting. It's not just about your husband, it should be shared, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
Thank you.
Outside of Bet Olive, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks to all of you for your nice words and for listening patiently for really almost an hour.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's a book
Yeah.
that begs to be written.
Yeah, Kate.
mhm.
Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing this. It was
Yeah.
very, very meaningful.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You
Thank-
really captured his spirit.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess maybe you can tell I'm still in love with him too.
Aw.
Well, that comes through very clearly.